Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. We are a proud part of this community, and my own group's working with Polk County, so we're really setting down our roots, and we look forward to expanding. I'd like to start off by asking a couple of quick questions just to get a sense of the group. Just give me a show of hands. How many of you are worried about the economy right now? Okay. How many of you want prosperity in Tampa Bay region? Okay, the last question. How many of you regularly beat your husband or wife? Okay, we've established who's awake. I've been asked to give you kind of a quick overview on industry cluster strategies. And most of you might think that clusters are what 8-year-old soccer teams do, but it's really a powerful tool for economic development. Doesn't work. Oh, here we go. What I'd like to do very quickly is to go over what is an industry cluster, what are the structures, foundations, and competitiveness of clusters, what are the benefits you achieve, and what are some things to think about on cluster development in this region. Okay, what is an industry cluster? An industry cluster is very simply, let me go back. There we go. A group of companies in allied fields that rely on an active set of relationships among themselves for individual efficiency, competitiveness, and linkages to the outside world. Clusters need critical masses of information, skills, relationships, and infrastructure in a particular field. You'll notice in the past the critical masses were raw materials or cheap labor. That isn't the case anymore. These competitiveness factors are in someone else is working this. I knew Stu wanted me to go fast, but all right, we'll just go from here and you can click for me. What holds them together? Clusters are in the same or related fields, or they're linked by three things: buyer-supplier relationships, common customers, or shared resources. The buyer-supplier relationships provide forward and backward linkages to core producers and then suppliers. Common customers provide competitors and collaborators, and shared resources are common interests built around using the same kind of human resources or technologies or other things. The origins of clustering really started in 1988. SRI actually did the first cluster study, but it turns out Michael Porter has a much better public relations activity, so it's typically connected to him. But it's now a standard part of the whole economic development strategy. Here's some examples of clusters in the US, and I don't know if you can see it from your various viewpoints, but if you think about just about any industry, you can think about what is kind of known to be a center, whether it's auto equipment in Michigan or financial services in New York, entertainment in Orlando. In the old days, these factors were really, sort of sources of raw materials or transportation nexuses or other things. But now, particularly with innovation activities and advanced technologies, they also tend to cluster into particular kinds of regions. The next slide shows similar examples of clusters around the world. And these clusters can range from very narrow things like cut flowers in the Netherlands to huge things like software in India or electronics or apparel in China. Basically, industries have a way of sort of being drawn toward particular centers or growing in them. Let's turn now to the structure, foundations, and competitiveness of industry clusters. What makes clusters competitive? Well, the competitive advantage of a location doesn't come from individual companies, but in clusters of companies. And every location, like Tampa Bay region, has a set of unique local conditions that underpin the ability of companies to compete. And the ability of the region's companies to grow and prosper depends on how their region provides them with the economic foundations they need to compete. This next slide kind of summarizes very nicely the overall cluster structure. At the top of the pyramid, you have what we call export-based industries. These are the core growth-oriented industries you want to promote. They depend on a series of supplier industries who provide human resources, inputs, distribution, and other services. And both of those sets of companies rely on economic foundations, human resources, innovation systems, infrastructure, capital and finance, and the regulatory environment. And you spoke today of some of these already. The important thing I'd like to stress about this is that all three of those levels have to be working together. Because if there are key gaps in any one of them, then you're going to have problem with stimulating new clusters. But once you do have them all working together, sort of magic happens. Everything starts to percolate. Clusters have life cycles. They start with a couple of companies, then they start building as individual companies and attracting other companies to them. Then they expand and grow linkages and supplier networks, and they finally achieve liftoff in terms of interfirm linkages and critical mass. The other part of this equation is, unfortunately, that clusters can go the other direction. In other words, they can start peeling off individual companies and basically going backwards, like the auto industry in Michigan, for example. But in general, this is the kind of life cycle you want to achieve. Now, there's some important implications for investment retention and attractions. You know, firms can be anchored to any region through some strength, whether it's strong and sophisticated demand, such as financial services in New York, dependable skilled employees, which drives software in India, the availability of venture capital, which works to really drive the IT and biotech industries in Silicon Valley, and excellent infrastructure, Tourism Orlando. The trick is for you as a region to identify what are those core strengths and attractions. Now let's talk a little bit about the benefits of clustering. They help you develop closer relationships between firms and their customers and suppliers. They build stronger and more competitive platforms in terms of skills, information, financing, and other needs. They help you to design and target training programs to meet the specific needs of your industry clusters. A lot of industries, they have these great educational systems, but they're not serving their local industries. They have the potential for public-private university partnerships, and they improve leverage with governments to focus on cluster-identified needs. So what can clustering do for you? It can improve your industry attraction efforts through the identification of regional strengths and assets, basically what Stuart mentioned in terms of developing the roadmap. It can inform and drive efforts to improve your economic foundations, and it can guide strategies for establishing, expanding, and retaining industries in the region. Now, what clusters cannot do is serve as a panacea to cure all ills. You can't grow them from scratch. You need some kind of foundation, so it's easier to either develop current industries or spin-offs from them. And the fact of defining a cluster by itself doesn't really get you very far. You really have to use the analysis and consensus building to catalyze action.